Hello everyone, this is Showtime 112. When Israel declared independence in May 1948, a nucleus of the future Air Force already existed. A small number of civilian airplanes had been used by the Jewish militias for various purposes, but the first true combat aircraft only came about 1 week after the declaration in the form of Avia S-199. This was the Czech-built Messerschmitt Bf-109 with an inferior engine. Czechoslovakia was the only country prepared to sell weapons to the new Jewish state, and this would later be supplemented by much better Spitfires, but several other aircraft types were acquired through clandestine operations in the USA and some other countries. A large surplus of World War II combat aircraft existed, and they could be bought, but not by Israel, which was under a weapons embargo. It might surprise many of you, but the American administration at the time was very unsupportive of the Jewish state, and federal agencies did everything possible to stop any weapon shipment to Israel. Several transport aircraft and one B-17 were confiscated before they could reach their destination, but some made it through. This included two P-51 Mustangs which arrived on August the 19th on a freighter ship SS Enterprise. The initial cadre of Israeli Air Force fighter pilots consisted mostly of volunteers and mercenaries from countries such as the USA, UK, Canada, or South Africa. Some were Jewish, others were not. Only two of the pilots were local Jews, born and raised in the region. The first pilot to take a P-51 on a mission was Gideon Lichtman, an American who flew Mustangs in the Pacific Theater in World War II. It was October 2nd, 1948, and a truce was in effect, so the mission was supposed to be reconnaissance. Lichtman first took the Mustang to Lebanon, then flew towards Damascus, and finally south towards the coast of Egypt. There, he faced some heavy flak, and he turned back north. He then spotted a fighter against the desert floor. It looked like a Sea Fury which Egypt wasn't supposed to have, but he was still sure it wasn't an Israeli airplane. As Lichtman approached, the enemy fighter turned and the fight began. The Arab fighter was flown very aggressively, but Lichtman eventually gained the advantage. He aimed and pressed the trigger, but nothing happened. His machine guns didn't work. Lichtman stayed behind the Fury until he could safely disengage towards the airfield at Herzliya. The fighter Lichtman fought really was a Sea Fury. One example was flown to Egypt by a Hawker test pilot to demonstrate it to the Egyptian Air Force. They liked it so much that they seized it and sent the pilot home. The Egyptian pilot who flew the Sea Fury and fought against Lichtman's Mustang is believed to have been squadron leader Abu Zaid, one of the most capable Arab fighter pilots of the war. Another opportunity for the Israeli Mustangs to achieve an aerial victory came on November the 4th, when the two P-51s took off on a recon mission over Egyptian air bases in Sinai. The two Israeli pilots were Boris Sr. and Rudi Augarten. A truce was in effect again, so they were not supposed to attack Arab airplanes unless they were perceived as a threat. At one point, the South African-born flight leader Boris Sr. spotted a Dakota on final approach. These airplanes were often used as bombers, and this was apparently enough for him to interpret the rules so that he could attack it. Senior dived on the Egyptian transport and damaged it. Moments later, Augarten damaged it further and the Dakota crash-landed. Boris Sr. wrote in his memoirs that he didn't feel very proud about shooting down a defenseless transport airplane, but he learned later that nobody inside the airplane was killed. Since May 1948, mysterious reconnaissance airplanes would fly into Israeli airspace from eastern Galilee, pass over Ramat David Air Base, and then continue south through Negev. They were nicknamed Shufti kites, and initially Israelis were unable to intercept them as their fighters were unsuitable for high altitudes at which the unknown airplanes were flying. With the arrival of the Mustang, that situation changed. Also, the unit was relocated from Herzliya to Hatzor, which gave them more time to react. The chosen pilot to fly the Intercept on November the 20th was Wayne Peake, an American with more P-51 experience than anyone else in the squadron, even though in his 100 combat missions he had never shot down an enemy airplane. As Peake came through 28,000 feet, the estimated altitude of the bogey, he had trouble spotting it. Guided by ground observers, he eventually realized that it was below him. But as Peake spotted the silhouette, his vision was blurring as the oxygen system wasn't functioning properly. He still approached and fired a short burst. His guns quickly jammed, but the mysterious Shufti kite started trailing smoke and eventually exploded. Peake reported that his victim was a 4-engine aircraft, probably a Halifax. But recovered pieces found floating in the sea indicated it was a Mosquito. Peake was oxygen deprived and saw double. He counted 4 engines instead of 2. Only in January 1949, it was revealed that the British were regularly sending their Mosquitoes to fly recon missions over Israel. The British may have pulled out of their Palestine protectorate, but they certainly haven't lost the interest in it. On January the 5th, 1949, an armistice initiative was launched by Egypt and supported by the USA and Britain. The hostilities were to end on 2 p.m. on the 7th. Israel accepted the terms, but there was still plenty of fighting left until the deadline. 2 Mustangs flown by Boris Sr. and Jack Doyle patrolled over the front lines in Sinai after having escorted bombers. Israeli Spitfires had fought and shot down 3 British Spitfires earlier that day, and now Senior spotted 6 fighters which appeared like Spitfires. He was sure they were not Israeli, since Israelis never flew so many of them together. He dived on them from the sun, and as he was approaching them at a much higher speed, he realized they weren't aware of him. He fired several bursts at the tail end Charlie, and then pulled to the left in a climbing turn. He noticed his victim smoking. The other airplane seemed unaware of his attack, probably focusing on the Israeli armored column below. Senior then called his wingman, Jack Doyle, and Doyle replied, but Senior couldn't see him, so he returned to base. He claimed the probable kill of a Spitfire. Doyle, however, was busy attacking another enemy aircraft. He was able to inflict heavy damage on one of them and saw it pouring black and brown smoke. He was able to make a few hits on another, but then he overshot. The aircraft eventually turned out to be Italian-built Macchi MC-205. They were often misidentified as Fiats because they were similar to another model by this manufacturer. Even though none of them actually saw their victims crash, Senior and Doyle were each credited with a kill only 2 hours before the ceasefire. Another major battle was fought by Israeli fighter pilots before the end of the fighting, but Mustangs were not involved in it, and that will be a story for another video. If you are interested in the earlier combat between Israeli and British Spitfires, you can find out more about it in another video on this channel. Only 2 Mustangs were available to the Israeli Air Force during the Independence War. More were acquired, and they saw combat again in the 1956 conflict, flying mostly close air support. If you liked the video, be sure to press the like button, which is an effective and simple way to help the channel. Join our Patreon supporters or donate on PayPal, because otherwise there might not be more content. Thank you and keep watching Showtime 112.